Hi there, it's Peter here again, the guy who hates tomatoes but loves front-end development. In today's video you will learn how to use the React Transition Group module to fade in and fade out elements of your React state. But as always, before we do that, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Before we dive into the code, let's review what we will be building. We'll use the React Transition Group to fade everything in on a page load. That will be using the appear functionality, and then we will be changing the content of the card. When we click on next, we're bringing a new card in, but before we do that, we animate the old property out. Okay, so this will be using again the React Transition Group, and we will be in full control of the CSS animations. React Transition Group applies a specific classes when the elements appear on the page when they enter and when they exit the viewport. And for that we will need to be in full control of the classes. When are they applied and when? And we will cover all appear, enter and exit classes. And the first one is the appear. Okay, so this happens when the element is mounted. And when the page is loaded for the first time, that's when the appear animation happens. We will need to specify the in to be true and appear true as well. Then we specify the timeout, which is the length of the animation, and the class name is fade. So that's the first part of the animation class, and then it is appended by the appear and appear active. Okay, so the fade becomes the name of the class, so you can make and name this whatever you feel like, but fade, we will use fade in our example. Okay, the next one is the exit. I'm specifically using the exit after appear because we will firstly appear everything on the page and then we will exit the old card out and bring the new one in. Okay, so the order I'm covering this in makes sense, and you will see later why it makes sense. Firstly, everything appears on the page, then we exit, we fade everything out, and we'll fade in the new card in. Okay, so here is the fade exit class in action. This is what we'll be having in a style sheet. We animate everything out, and then we use the enter to bring the new card, the new property in. Okay, this will animate from opacity 0 to opacity 1, and the duration is the same. Okay, I kept the duration the same just to make it very simple, but you can obviously make more complex animations if you feel comfortable with the classes. Now let's review the code inside of VS Code. We have a simple app that has 3 methods on it: toggle appear, next property, previous property. These 3 are toggled or run when we click on these 3 buttons. We'll explain a little bit later what the appear does, but the next and previous, it's pretty simple. We are changing the state, the property on this application. Okay, so we have a collection of data properties inside of the data folder, which is an array of properties, and we are taking the first one and applying it to the state. Okay, so every time we load the page, there is one property, the first one from the array is set on the state, and when we click next, we simply adding 1 to it and changing the new property. Okay, so this will be using the previous, using exactly the same code, but we are changing the index to -1, and the toggle appear changes the state of the appear home. That will trigger the appear animation true or false, and we'll simply toggling it from the previous value. Okay, so hopefully you are familiar with React. This should be very simple state that you're already familiar with. And now we can dive into the animations. We passing the property of the current state inside of the home component, and inside of here we have a card component that renders the property, and we passing the property from the top level all the way to the card, and that's what renders the nicely styled property inside of the card. Okay, so that's the 3 components that we will be working with. We've covered the data JSON object, and inside of the style sheet I have a default style, so this renders and looks presentable on the screen. And if we look at this in a browser, you will see that we don't have anything appearing. Simply it just shows on the page, and when we click next, the card is replaced with the new value, with the new object, and we don't see any animations. Okay, so now let's try to figure out how to use the CSS animations of the React Transition group to fade everything in on a page load. Now let's go back to VS Code, and inside of the app.js, inside of the render method, we want to wrap this home component inside of the CSS Transition. So let's firstly import it at the top of the file. We'll import it from the React Transition group module, and we importing the CSS Transition. Okay, so that will let us wrap the home component inside of the CSS Transition, and now we can specify a couple properties of it. The first one will be in. We want to set it to true, and we've set this as the appear home on our state. Okay, so if I scroll back up, we'll see that the appear home is inside of our state. The default value is true, so we have the in set to true. Now we will set also the appear to be true. Okay, so that's what tells the transition to really run this CSS transition on the page load. And then we will set the timeout to be 600 milliseconds. Okay, the last thing we need to specify is the class name, and that will be fade. And actually it's not a class name, it's class names. Okay, because this will generate multiple classes, and that make sure that you've got also class names, not just class name like on all the other React elements. And fade will be the base keyword that will be used for our animation. Okay, so if I look at the style sheet for the first time, and you will see that we have a couple default styles at the top of the style sheet. There is some default styling, but then we have the appear on a page load. The fade is the keyword that we've set inside of the React component, and we are animating it from opacity 0 to opacity 1 in duration of 300 milliseconds. Okay, so I could actually change the duration to 300 milliseconds to match our timeout inside of the CSS. And if I save both files and review it in a browser, we should see nice animation of simple fade in on a page load. Okay, it happened quite quickly. So I go back in here, and if I go back to the animation dev tools, you see that we have the animation happening, and that's what triggered. That's the CSS animation component that we've introduced. And I think if we make it 1 second, just so it's more obvious, we'll see that the animation really takes 1 second. So if it's the intro animation on your page load, the animation could be slightly longer, but for any transitions between elements, it should be much faster. Okay, so I think it looks pretty elegant when things fade in instead of if they just appear. So this is how you would use the appear of CSS Transition group to show things on a page load. Now I've made the animation to last 10 seconds, and you can see the fade appear class and fade appear active class applied. So that's what makes the animation, and at the end of it we see fade enter done. Okay, so if you have a final state, ending state of your appearing transition, then you would put that in the fade enter done. Okay, in my example, I'm not styling anything. The page or the elements are styled the way that they would normally appear, so I don't have any specific fade enter done styles, but if you want it, you can use that class as well. Now let's do the transition of the card itself. So when we're clicking on the buttons and changing the property inside of the card, we want to animate one out and bring in the new one, and for that we will use the CSS transition as well. So we can import it, we can copy the import, paste it inside of the home, and we will also this time use transition group. Okay, so we need to import transition group as well. The reason for that is that now we will need to render two elements at the same time. One is the card animating out and one is the card animating in. So for that we will need to wrap it inside of the transition group. We didn't have to do it on the app because we had only one element. There is nothing, we don't need to pass in any key or anything. It's just one component that we want to fade in. But for the card, we need to know which card to animate out, wait with the animation in a little bit, and then bring it in. Okay, so in that case, we will need to wrap it in transition group. And for that, I can simply replace the div, the container of the card, to transition group. And inside of it, we'll have the CSS transition. Okay, so again, we'll wrap the card inside of CSS transition and we'll specify the attributes on it. We will set the timeout to 300 milliseconds, set the class names to fade, so we'll keep the same naming as in the app component, and this time we need to also specify a key. Okay, if we don't specify a key, we would not see any transition, because the transition group wouldn't know which one is currently the one which should be rendered. So remember, when you're having two elements, you need to always specify the key for the transition to work, and we're using the property.id that comes from the properties array. Okay, so here are the IDs of the properties. They are unique IDs, and that's why we need to pass them, or we're using them for the key of these CSS transitions. And this will be it. If we look at the CSS style sheet, we have the fade enter classes and fade exit classes already done. Again, we are fading in and out, so we should see the old card animating out and the new one animating in. Okay, so let's see how this looks in a browser. We're clicking on the next and we see one animating out, one animating in. As you can see, the transition timeout is only 300 milliseconds, so it feels very fast, but in some cases this is what you want: a simple transition between two elements instead of swapping the data. Makes a nice user interaction, much better user experience. Okay, so if I slow it down, now we'll see the cards fading or cross-fading into each other over the duration of 5 seconds. And we have the fade enter, fade exit classes applied at the right time. Okay, so at one moment we are rendering both cards and we cross-fading them. If we wanted to fade one out and then fade the new one in, we would need to add a delay. Okay, so let's do that now together. We can increase it to 10 seconds just to make it very obvious. And inside of the style sheet, we will keep it for 5 milliseconds or 5 seconds, but we will set the delay on the enter animation to 500 milliseconds or 5000 milliseconds. Okay, so 5 seconds we will be animating out the old card, then we will wait with the fading in for 5 seconds, and over the duration of 5 seconds we'll animate it in. Okay, so this will make not a crossfade transition, but we will firstly animate out the old card and bring the new one in. And for that we need to have the timeout, the 5 seconds plus 5 seconds. Okay, so we need to have it set to 10 seconds. Okay, so if I go back to the code or back to the browser and click next, let's bring up the card inside of the elements and click on next. We'll see firstly fading out the old card, and then we are fading out the new one. Okay, so this is a slowdown of the fade in, fade out without the crossfade. Okay, another little thing which could make a different experience. So based on your designs, based on your UI, you can either crossfade these two elements or fade firstly out the old one and then bring the new one in using the CSS delay. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully we've covered quite a lot about the React transition group and how to apply the styles and classes to make some better user experience. Now let's create one more effect. This time we will call it slide. So inside of the home component, we'll change the class name to slide. We will change the duration to 450 milliseconds, and inside of the style sheet I have the slide enter and slide exit classes already created. we are using the transform scale and we are scaling it down and up on the transition in or out. Okay, so I'll firstly show you how it looks in a browser. It's quite quick transition, and then we can slow it down again. So we are animating out the old card, and from the same spot we try to animate the new one in. Okay, so again, different layout or different effect, how you can replace two different states of application and show a better UI for the users. Here is the 10 times slower variation of the same effect. You see the first card animating out and the new one fades in and scales up to the original position. And if we look at the card inside of the inspector, you'll see that now we are applying the slide enter, slide exit classes, and that's what creates this effect. Okay, so I'll let you explore the style sheet. Hopefully you are familiar with how CSS transitions work. This tutorial wasn't aimed for CSS transitions. I wanted to focus on how the React transition group works and which classes are applied when. And that's it all for today. Hope you've enjoyed this React transition group tutorial. Let me know in the comments. Are you using CSS animations in your React projects? I'm very curious to know, so let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in my future videos. Until then, happy coding. Bye.